The gates of the Ashcroft estate did not open for outsiders, but Elena Whitfield did not wait for permission. She pushed past two startled guards, her boots striking the stone floor of the entrance hall like small explosions, and she did not stop until she reached the great doors at the far end. Behind her, voices rose in confusion. Ahead of her, past those doors, sat the man responsible for the ruin of everything her family had built. She shoved the doors open with both hands. Inside, a long hall stretched before her, lined with tall windows and old portraits of men, who all seemed to share the same hard jaw and cold eyes. At the far end, seated at the head of a long table surrounded by his advisors, was Damien Ashcroft, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. He looked up at the sudden noise, his expression unreadable, as the doors slammed against the walls, and every head in the room turned toward her. Elena did not care that she was interrupting a council meeting. She did not care that every person in that room could, if they wished, do things to her that no ordinary human could survive. She marched forward, her fists clenched at her sides, her chest rising and falling with barely restrained fury. "You," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "You did this. Don't you dare sit there looking calm while my family loses everything." A few of the advisors rose from their seats, alarmed, hands moving toward weapons out of habit. Damien lifted one hand, a small gesture, and they froze in place. His golden eyes stayed fixed on the woman storming toward him, and something in his chest, something old and instinctive, stirred awake. "You ordered your men to burn the eastern fields," Elena continued, stopping only when she reached the table, close enough now that she could see the faint shift of color in his eyes. "Fields that fed families for 3 generations, fields that were not even part of the disputed border. Do you understand what you have done? Do you understand what my mother has to explain to the children in our village who will go hungry this winter?" Damien did not answer right away. He was looking at her, the way a man looks at something he has never seen before, even though logically, he knew exactly what she was. A human woman, no different in appearance from 1,000 others he had encountered in his long life leading the pack. And yet something about her, the fire behind her eyes, the way her whole body seemed to vibrate with the force of her anger, pulled at something buried deep inside him. His wolf, usually a quiet presence at the back of his mind, sat up and took notice. It did not recoil from her anger. It leaned into it. "You will let me finish," Elena snapped, when he still had not spoken, mistaking his silence for arrogance. "I did not walk 2 hours through the woods and argue my way past your guards to be ignored. I want answers. I want compensation. And I want you to look me in the eye and tell me why you thought it was acceptable to destroy the only thing standing between my people and starvation." One of the advisors, an older wolf named Callum, cleared his throat nervously. "My lord, perhaps we should discuss this matter in a more private." "No," Damien said, his voice quiet but absolute. The single word silenced the room instantly. His eyes had not left Elena's face this entire time. "Let her speak." Elena blinked, thrown slightly off balance by his response, but she recovered quickly, her anger too large to be smothered by a moment of confusion. "Fine. Then here is what I have to say. Your border patrol crossed onto land that belongs to my family by treaty, land your own grandfather signed over generations ago, and they burned it without warning, without explanation, and without a single word of apology since. I do not know what kind of leader allows that to happen, and then hides behind stone walls, while the people harmed by his decisions are left to clean up the ashes." Something shifted in Damien's chest as she spoke, a warmth spreading through him, that had nothing to do with the words themselves, and everything to do with the woman saying them. His wolf pressed forward inside him, urging him closer to her, wanting to close the distance between them, wanting to breathe her in. He did not understand it. He had faced furious wolves before, powerful alphas snarling for territory, grieving mothers weeping for lost children, but never had he felt this pull, this magnetic certainty that the person standing in front of him mattered more than anyone else in the room. "I did not order the burning of the eastern fields," Damien said finally, rising slowly from his seat. He was taller than she had expected, broad-shouldered, moving with the careful control of someone who had spent a lifetime holding immense strength in check. "That decision was made without my knowledge, by men acting outside their orders. I intend to find out exactly who gave that command." Elena's jaw tightened, unconvinced. "That is easy to say," now that I am standing in front of you demanding answers. It is the truth, Damien said simply. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back slightly to keep looking at him, and for one strange moment, the anger in her chest wavered, replaced by something she could not name, a flicker of uncertainty at the steadiness in his gaze. Then prove it, she said, recovering her edge. Words are easy. My family cannot eat words. You will have your compensation, Damien said. Full restitution for the fields, and additional support for your village through the winter. I will see to it personally. Elena studied him, searching his face for the lie she was certain must be there, the smooth deception of a powerful man, used to getting his way through charm alone. But she found nothing except a strange, quiet intensity that unsettled her more than outright dishonesty would have. I will hold you to that, she said finally, taking a step back, suddenly aware of how close they had drifted to one another during the exchange. If nothing changes within the week, I will be back, and I will bring the whole village with me next time. I do not doubt it, Damien said, and there was something almost like the beginning of a smile at the corner of his mouth, though he fought it down before it could fully form. Elena turned on her heel and walked back down the long hall, her footsteps echoing against the stone, and it was only once the doors closed behind her that the room seemed to remember how to breathe again. Every advisor at the table turned to look at their Alpha King, who remained standing exactly where he was, staring at the doors through which the furious young woman had just vanished. My lord, Callum said carefully, are you well? Damien did not answer immediately. He was too caught up in trying to understand the sensation still coursing through him, a pull so strong it felt like a rope tied around his ribs, tugging him toward the door, toward the direction Elena had gone. His wolf howled with quiet insistence inside him, a feeling he had never experienced before in all his years as Alpha. He knew, with sudden and undeniable clarity, exactly what had happened. He had imprinted. It was not something spoken of often, not something that happened to every wolf, and certainly not something he had ever expected to happen to him, in the middle of a council meeting, while being shouted at by an angry human woman. Imprinting was rare, a bond formed between a wolf and their true mate, an instinctive recognition that went beyond attraction, beyond logic, straight into the ancient part of the mind that had guided wolves long before kingdoms and councils existed. And his wolf, apparently, had decided that the woman who had just torn into him, with blistering fury, was the one meant for him. My lord, Callum said again, more insistent this time. Damien finally turned to face his advisors, forcing his expression back into something calm and composed, though inside his chest, his heart still beat with unfamiliar urgency. Find out who gave the order to burn the eastern fields, he said. I want a name by tomorrow morning. Of course, Callum said, though his eyes lingered on Damien with obvious curiosity, sensing that something significant had just occurred, even if he could not name what it was. The meeting resumed, but Damien found it nearly impossible to focus. Every few minutes his mind drifted back to Elena, to the fire in her eyes, the way her voice had risen and cracked with genuine anguish over her family and her village. Most people who came before him arrived with careful diplomacy, measured words meant to please rather than provoke. She had done neither. She had walked into the most dangerous room in his territory and told him exactly what she thought of him. Consequences be damned. His wolf adored her for it. That evening, long after the council had dispersed and the estate had grown quiet, Damien found himself standing at the window of his study, looking out over the dark shapes of the forest beyond the walls. Somewhere out there, past the trees, was the village Elena had spoken of, the fields that had been damaged, the family she had rushed to defend without a single thought for her own safety. He thought about how she had marched into his hall without fear, how she had stood her ground even as armed guards moved to intercept her, how her anger had not wavered even when faced with an Alpha King capable of ending her life with a single command. There was something remarkable about a person who could be that brave, or perhaps that reckless, in defense of people she loved. His wolf pressed against the inside of his mind again, restless, wanting to move, wanting to go find her, to be near her, to hear her voice again even if it meant hearing it raised in anger. It was a strange thing, feeling such powerful longing directed at someone who so clearly despised him. Damien exhaled slowly and turned away from the window. He had led his pack through wars, through droughts, through the slow and careful work of building peace between rival territories. He was not a man who acted on impulse, but as he stood there, replaying the sound of Elena's voice in his mind, he understood, perhaps for the first time in his adult life, what it meant to feel something entirely outside his control. He would keep his promise about the fields, that much he owed her regardless of what his wolf wanted. But he also knew, with a certainty that unsettled him, that this would not be the last time he saw Elena Whitfield storming through his territory with fire in her eyes. He found himself hoping it would not be. The following morning, Damien rose before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of discipline, and made his way to the training yard, where several of his guards were already sparring in the pale early light. He watched them for a while, his mind still tangled in thoughts of the previous day, before Callum approached him with a folded piece of parchment in hand. "We found the men responsible for the burning," Callum said, handing over the parchment. 3 border guards acting on a mistaken order, believing the eastern fields to be part of the disputed territory. They have been removed from duty pending your judgment. Damien scanned the parchment quickly, his jaw tightening at the details. "This was carelessness, not malice," he said finally. "But carelessness that cost an innocent family their livelihood is not something I will overlook. See that they understand the seriousness of what they have done, and ensure the compensation for the Whitfield family and their village is prepared immediately. I want it delivered by midday." "Understood," Callum said, though he hesitated before turning to leave. "My lord, if I may ask, is there a particular reason you are handling this matter so personally? Compensation disputes are usually resolved through the council." Damien considered his answer carefully. He was not ready to explain what had happened in that hall, not ready to admit even to his most trusted advisor that his wolf had imprinted on a woman who had spent their entire first meeting shouting at him. "She deserves a direct response," he said simply. "Her family has been wronged. I intend to make it right myself." Callum studied him a moment longer, clearly sensing there was more beneath the surface, but he said nothing further, and left to carry out the orders. Damien spent the rest of the morning distracted, his mind circling back again and again to the memory of Elena's voice, the exact shade of brown in her eyes, the way her dark hair had come loose from its tie during her furious march down the hall. He told himself it was simply the after effect of the imprint, some biological pull he had no control over, nothing more. But even as he thought it, he knew it was not entirely true. There had been something in her honesty, her fearless devotion to the people she loved, that had struck him far deeper than any instinctive bond could explain. By midday, word came that the compensation had been delivered to the Whitfield family, along with additional supplies for the village to help them through the coming winter. Damien had expected to feel some sense of resolution once the matter was handled, a quiet satisfaction at having corrected a wrong. Instead, he felt only a renewed restlessness, a wolf inside him pacing at the edges of his mind, wanting more than a transaction completed from a distance. He wanted to see her again. He told himself it was simply to confirm the compensation had been received properly, that a responsible leader would want to verify such matters personally, rather than relying solely on reports. It was a thin justification, and he knew it, but he found himself calling for his horse regardless, riding out from the estate in the early afternoon toward the village Elena had described. The ride took him through dense forest, the trees thinning gradually, until he emerged onto open farmland, much of it scorched and blackened from the fire that had swept through days earlier. He slowed his horse as he approached the edge of the damaged fields, taking in the scale of the destruction, the burned stalks and ruined earth stretching far wider than he had realized from the reports alone. It was worse than he had imagined. No wonder Elena had been so furious. He continued on toward the village itself, a modest cluster of homes built along a winding dirt road, smoke curling from chimneys as the afternoon grew cooler. Villagers paused in their work to watch him ride past, murmuring among themselves, clearly recognizing the crest on his horse's saddle, even if they did not know his face. He could feel the wariness in their stares, understandable given the circumstances, but he pressed forward regardless, drawn by an instinct he no longer bothered trying to resist. He found Elena near the edge of the village, kneeling in a small garden plot beside a modest cottage, her sleeves rolled up as she worked the soil with quick, efficient movements. She did not notice him at first, too absorbed in her task, and for a moment, Damien simply watched her, struck by how different she looked in this quiet moment compared to the furious woman who had stormed into his hall the day before. There was a gentleness to her here, a careful tenderness in the way she handled the small green shoots pushing up from the earth. Then she looked up, and the gentleness vanished instantly, replaced by wary surprise as she recognized him. "You," she said, rising quickly to her feet, brushing dirt from her hands. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see the damage myself," Damien said, dismounting from his horse. "And to confirm the compensation reached your family as promised." Elena crossed her arms, studying him with obvious suspicion. "It arrived. More than we asked for, actually. I did not expect you to follow through so quickly." "I keep my word," Damien said. "We will see about that," Elena replied, though there was slightly less edge in her voice than there had been the day before. "Most nobles make promises they forget the moment they are out of sight. I will believe you truly meant it, once winter comes, and we are still standing." Damien nodded slowly, accepting her skepticism without argument. It was fair, given everything her family had endured. "I would like to see the fields," he said, "if you are willing to show me." Elena hesitated, clearly weighing whether to trust him, before finally gesturing for him to follow. They walked together in silence at first, moving along the edge of the village toward the blackened fields beyond, and Damien found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him, his wolf humming quietly with contentment, simply at being near her. "My grandfather planted the first rows of these fields," Elena said eventually, breaking the silence as they reached the burned edge of the farmland. "He used to tell me stories about how difficult those early years were, how many times the harvest nearly failed before the soil finally cooperated. My family has worked this land for 3 generations. It is not just food to us, it is everything we have built." Damien looked out over the ruined fields, the weight of her words settling heavily in his chest. "I am sorry this happened," he said quietly. "Regardless of who gave the order, it happened under my leadership, and that makes it my responsibility." Elena glanced at him, clearly surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "That is not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" "Excuses," she said. "Deflection. Powerful men rarely admit fault so easily." "I am not most powerful men," Damien said, and something in the way he said it made Elena look at him a moment longer than necessary, studying his face, as though trying to solve a puzzle she had not expected to encounter. They continued walking along the perimeter of the fields, as the afternoon light began to soften, and gradually, the conversation shifted away from the damage and toward smaller things, the history of the village, the challenges of farming in the northern climate, the resilience of the people who called this land home. Elena spoke with obvious passion about her community, and Damien found himself listening more intently than he had listened to anyone in a very long time, drawn in by the sincerity behind every word. By the time he finally mounted his horse to return to the estate, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Elena stood at the edge of the village, watching him prepare to leave, her expression less guarded than it had been earlier, though still far from warm. "Thank you for coming to see it yourself," she said finally, the words seeming to cost her some effort. Most would not have bothered. "I will return to check on the rebuilding progress," Damien said, and though he told himself it was purely a matter of duty, his wolf stirred eagerly at the thought of seeing her again. Elena studied him a moment longer, something unreadable flickering across her face, before she nodded once and turned back toward her family's cottage. Damien watched her go for a long moment before finally turning his horse toward home, his mind already circling back to the promise he had just made, counting the days until he could reasonably return. He rode back through the darkening forest, with his wolf strangely calm inside him, satisfied for now, though he knew this peace would not last. The imprint bond pulled at him steadily, a quiet insistence that would only grow stronger the longer he stayed away from her. He did not know yet what this would mean for his future, for his responsibilities as Alpha King, for the delicate balance of power he had spent years maintaining across his territories. But as the estate came into view through the trees, its windows glowing warm against the darkening sky, Damien found that for the first time in a long while, he was looking forward to what came next. 3 days passed before Damien found himself standing outside the walls of the Whitfield cottage again, this time with a wagon of supplies trailing behind him, rather than a single horse. He told himself the extra materials, timber for repairing a damaged fence, seed for replanting a portion of the fields early, were simply part of fulfilling his promise to the village. His council, however, had begun to notice a pattern that troubled them. "This is the third visit this week," Callum said carefully, as they rode together toward the village, keeping his tone light, even as concern shadowed his eyes. "Compensation disputes rarely require the Alpha King's personal attention more than once." "This dispute is unusual," Damien replied, keeping his gaze fixed straight ahead. "Unusual," Callum repeated, testing the word. "My lord, forgive me for speaking plainly, but the pack has begun to whisper. They wonder why their alpha rides out to a human village nearly every day, when matters of far greater urgency wait for his attention here." Damien's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew Callum was right to be concerned, knew that his behavior since the imprint had shifted in ways that were becoming impossible to hide. His wolf no longer settled for distant reassurance that Elena was safe and well. It wanted proof, wanted to see her, hear her voice, watch the way her expression changed when she spoke about something she cared about. It was, Damien realized with some discomfort, beginning to resemble obsession. When they arrived at the village, Elena was waiting near the fence line, arms crossed, her expression a familiar mixture of wariness and reluctant curiosity. She had grown somewhat used to his visits, though she still greeted him each time as though expecting some hidden motive to finally reveal itself. "Back again," she said as he dismounted. "Should I start assuming you have nothing better to do with your time?" "I have plenty to occupy my time," Damien said. "I simply choose to spend some of it, ensuring this village recovers properly." Elena raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, but gestured toward the wagon. "What have you brought this time?" "Timber for the fence your neighbor mentioned needed repair, and early seed for a portion of the fields, enough to get ahead of the planting season before the ground fully recovers." She studied the supplies for a long moment, something softening slightly in her expression despite her obvious effort to maintain her guarded distance. "You remembered the fence. I only mentioned it once, in passing." "I remember most things you say," Damien admitted, and immediately regretted how honest the words sounded once they left his mouth. Elena looked at him sharply, clearly caught off guard by the admission, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the air between them thick with something neither was quite ready to name. Then she cleared her throat and turned briskly toward the wagon, breaking the tension. "Well, since you are here, you may as well make yourself useful," she said, hoisting a length of timber onto her shoulder. "The fence will not repair itself." Damien found himself smiling, a real smile, unguarded and unfamiliar, as he moved to help her carry the supplies toward the damaged section of fencing. They worked together through the afternoon, and though their conversation remained peppered with sharp remarks and pointed questions from Elena, there was an easier rhythm to it now, less confrontation, and more the natural back and forth of two people, slowly, cautiously, learning how to exist in the same space. At one point, as Damien struggled to hold a fence post steady while Elena hammered it into place, she glanced up at him, with an expression of genuine amusement. "For someone who commands an entire territory of powerful wolves, you are remarkably bad at holding a post still," she said. "I have never claimed to be a carpenter," Damien replied, adjusting his grip. "Clearly not," Elena said, though there was warmth in her voice now that had not been there during their first encounter. "I suppose even Alpha Kings have their limitations." "A great many, apparently," Damien said. "Discovered entirely within the last few days." Elena paused mid-swing, glancing at him with a curious tilt of her head, sensing there was more meaning behind his words than the simple joke suggested. But she did not press him further, and the moment passed as she returned her attention to the fence post. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they finished the repairs and stood back to survey their work, the fence now sturdy and complete. Elena wiped her hands on her apron, surveying the results with quiet satisfaction. "Not bad," she said. "For a beginner." "High praise," Damien said, and this time when their eyes met, something passed between them that neither could easily dismiss as simple courtesy. Elena looked away first, clearing her throat and busying herself with gathering the leftover tools. "You should head back before dark," she said, her voice slightly less steady than before. "The roads are not safe once the sun sets fully." "I am not concerned for my own safety," Damien said. "I did not say I was concerned for you," Elena replied quickly, though the flush rising in her cheeks suggested otherwise. I simply meant, it is common sense to travel while there is still light. Damien allowed her the excuse, though his wolf noted the flush with quiet satisfaction, interpreting it as encouragingly as it interpreted everything else about her. He gathered his horse's reins and prepared to mount, pausing before he did. "Elena," he said, and she looked up at the use of her name, something she had not given him permission to use so casually, though she did not correct him. "Thank you for allowing me to help today." "Do not make it strange," she said, though there was no real bite behind the words. "You destroyed our fields. The least you can do is help rebuild a fence." "Understood," Damien said, mounting his horse. "I will return again soon." "Of course you will," Elena muttered, though Damien caught the small smile she failed to fully suppress, before turning back toward her cottage. The ride home passed quickly, Damien's mind still replaying the afternoon, the sound of her laughter when he had nearly dropped a fence post on his own foot, the warmth in her voice by the end of their work together. His wolf was calmer than it had been in days, satisfied by the time spent in her presence, though it still pulled restlessly at the thought of the growing distance between the estate and the village. That evening, Callum approached him again as he prepared for the evening meal, his expression carefully neutral in a way that told Damien he had something difficult to say. "My lord, the council has requested a formal meeting tomorrow to discuss the increasing frequency of your visits to the human village," Callum said. "There are concerns about how this appears to neighboring territories, particularly given the ongoing tension with the Draven Pack along our western border." Damien felt his jaw tighten at the mention of the Draven Pack, a rival territory that had grown increasingly aggressive in recent months, testing the boundaries of Ashcroft land with small incursions that so far had stopped short of open conflict. He understood the concern, understood that his council feared any perception of distraction or weakness might embolden their rivals further. "I will attend the meeting," Damien said, "but I will not apologize for ensuring a wronged village receives proper support." "No one is asking you to apologize," Callum said gently. "We are simply asking you to consider how your actions are perceived, and whether there is more to this situation than has been shared with the council." Damien met his advisor's steady gaze, recognizing the unspoken question behind his words. Callum suspected something, perhaps not the full truth of the imprint, but enough to sense that Damien's behavior was driven by something beyond simple duty. He considered for a moment, confiding in his old friend, explaining the bond that had formed so suddenly and completely, but something held him back, a private instinct, to protect what was still fragile and new, before exposing it to the scrutiny of others. "There is more to consider," Damien said carefully, "but I am not yet ready to discuss it fully. I ask for your patience, Callum. I have not led this pack poorly these past years. Trust that I will not begin now." Callum studied him for a long moment, before finally nodding, though concern remained evident in his expression. "I trust you, my lord, but others on the council may require more convincing." "Then I will convince them," Damien said, though privately he wondered how he might explain something even he did not fully understand. He spent that night largely awake, staring at the ceiling of his chambers, his wolf restless beneath his skin, replaying every moment of the afternoon spent with Elena. He thought about the ease that had crept into their conversation despite its rocky beginning, the way her sharp wit had begun to feel less like an attack and more like an invitation, a challenge he found himself eager to meet. He also thought about the growing danger along the western border, the increasing boldness of the Draven Pack's incursions, and the uncomfortable truth that his attention had been divided in recent days between two pressing matters, one demanding his strategic focus as Alpha King, the other pulling at something far more instinctive and difficult to control. He did not yet know how these two threads of his life would intertwine, but he sensed, with the same certainty that had told him the moment he imprinted, that they eventually would. The following morning arrived gray and overcast, matching the somber mood that had settled over the estate, as council members gathered for the meeting Callum had mentioned. Damien took his seat at the head of the table, aware of the careful glances exchanged among his advisors, and braced himself for a conversation he knew would require considerable diplomacy. "My lord," began an older advisor named Edric, his tone respectful but firm, "we understand the importance of maintaining goodwill with neighboring human communities, particularly after the unfortunate incident with the Eastern Fields. However, several of us have noticed a pattern in your recent activities that raises questions." "Speak plainly," Damien said. Edric hesitated only briefly before continuing. You have visited the Whitfield village nearly every day this week, spending hours there personally, overseeing repairs that could easily be delegated to lower-ranking members of the pack. Meanwhile, reports from our western border indicate increasing hostility from the Draven pack, incidents that would normally warrant your direct attention and strategic planning. Damien absorbed the criticism without visible reaction, though internally he recognized the fairness of the concern. I am aware of the situation along the western border, he said, and I assure you, it has not escaped my attention entirely. With respect, my lord, Edric pressed, it appears to have escaped a significant portion of your attention. The pack looks to you for leadership and protection. Prolonged focus on a matter already resolved through compensation raises questions about priorities. The room fell silent, waiting for Damien's response. He considered his words carefully, aware that the moment called for a delicate balance between honesty and discretion. The matter with the Whitfield village is not simply about compensation, Damien said finally. It concerns a bond I have formed, one that I did not choose, and cannot easily explain, but one that nonetheless demands my attention as much as any threat along our borders. The council exchanged glances, understanding beginning to dawn on several faces. Callum, who had clearly suspected something along these lines, nodded slowly, though he said nothing. You speak of an imprint, Edric said finally, his voice quieter now, weighted with the significance of what such a bond meant for a wolf, let alone an alpha king. I do, Damien confirmed. A murmur rippled through the council, a mixture of surprise and concern, evident in the exchanged glances. Imprinting was rare enough among ordinary wolves, but for an alpha king to imprint on a human woman, one who had first entered his territory in a state of open fury, carried implications far beyond simple personal matters. This complicates things considerably, Edric said, though his tone remained measured. The pack will need guidance on how to understand this development, and the situation along our western border cannot wait indefinitely for your full attention. I understand the weight of both responsibilities, Damien said. I will not allow one to compromise the other. I ask the council to trust that I can manage both, and I will personally review the reports from the western border this afternoon to determine our next course of action. The meeting continued for some time longer, discussing strategies for addressing the Draven pack's incursions, but Damien found his mind repeatedly drifting back to the conversation about the imprint, aware that word would spread quickly through the pack, now that it had been spoken aloud within the council. He wondered how Elena would react if she learned the truth, wondered how he might even begin to explain something so far outside anything she would have encountered in her life among humans. He resolved that he would tell her eventually, when the moment felt right, when he had found the words to explain a bond that even he was still struggling to fully understand. Until then, he would continue as he had been, drawn steadily and inevitably toward her, trusting that whatever came next, his wolf's instincts, however inconvenient their timing, had not led him astray. News of unrest along the western border reached Damien again, just 2 days after the council meeting, this time in the form of a bloodied messenger who arrived at the estate gates well past midnight, barely able to stand from exhaustion. Damien was pulled from sleep to receive the report personally, and what he heard chilled him more than any political maneuvering he had faced in years. The Draven pack had crossed fully into Ashcroft territory, burning a small outpost near the western ridge and wounding 3 guards stationed there. It was no longer a matter of tension or posturing. It was an act of open aggression, one that demanded immediate response. Gather the council, Damien ordered, already dressing as he spoke. I want a full report on Draven troop movements within the hour. The following days passed in a blur of strategy meetings, border patrols, and careful diplomacy aimed at avoiding full-scale conflict while still demonstrating enough strength to deter further incursions. Damien threw himself into the crisis with the discipline expected of an alpha king, but even amid the chaos, his wolf remained acutely aware of the distance growing between him and Elena, a constant undercurrent of restlessness beneath the surface of his focus. He had not visited the village in 4 days, the longest stretch since the imprint had formed, and the absence gnawed at him in ways that made concentrating on troop formations and border defenses more difficult than it should have been. He told himself it was simply the nature of the bond, an instinctive pull he would eventually learn to manage alongside his other responsibilities, But the truth was more complicated than he wanted to admit even to himself. He missed her. Not simply the pull of the imprint, though that remained a constant hum beneath his thoughts, but the actual experience of her presence, her sharp observations, the way she challenged him without hesitation, the small moments of unexpected warmth that had begun to soften the edges of her initial fury. He found himself wondering how she was faring, whether the fields had begun to show signs of recovery, whether she thought of him at all during the days he had been unable to visit. On the 5th day, as tensions along the border reached a temporary lull following a tense but ultimately peaceful negotiation with a Draven envoy, Damien finally found a few hours he could spare, and without hesitation, he rode toward the village, his wolf practically singing with anticipation beneath his skin. He found Elena in the fields this time, not in her family's garden, but out among the recovering crops, kneeling beside rows of young seedlings that had begun to push through the once blackened earth. She looked up as he approached, and something in her expression shifted at the sight of him, relief flickering briefly before she managed to smooth it back into practiced neutrality. "I wondered if you had abandoned your promises after all," she said, rising to brush dirt from her knees. "There has been trouble along the western border," Damien said. "I apologize for the absence. It could not be helped." Elena's expression sharpened with concern despite herself. "Trouble? Is it serious?" "Serious enough," Damien admitted. "The Draven pack has grown increasingly bold in recent months. They crossed fully into our territory 5 nights ago and attacked an outpost near the western ridge." "Was anyone killed?" "No," Damien said. 3 guards were injured, but all will recover. We have since reached a temporary truce with their envoy, though I do not expect it to hold indefinitely." Elena studied him for a long moment, something thoughtful crossing her features. "You look exhausted," she said finally, her tone softer than Damien had expected. "When was the last time you actually slept?" "I do not recall," Damien admitted, surprised by the honesty of his own answer, and more surprised still by how easily it had come in her presence. "Sit down," Elena said, gesturing toward a low stone wall bordering the field. "Before you fall down." Damien obeyed, lowering himself onto the wall with more relief than he expected, and Elena settled beside him after a moment's hesitation, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her, though not quite touching. "Tell me about this Draven pack," she said. "What do they want?" "Territory, mostly," Damien said. "Their lands have grown less fertile in recent years, and their alpha, a man named Corwin Draven, has grown desperate enough to consider taking what he cannot cultivate himself." "And you think this truce will not last?" "I fear it will not," Damien admitted. "Corwin is not a patient man. He will look for the next opportunity to test our defenses, and eventually, if he believes us weak enough, he will attempt something far more significant than a single outpost." Elena was quiet for a moment, considering his words with the same seriousness she seemed to bring to every problem she encountered. "You carry a great deal of weight," she said finally. "The whole territory depends on your judgment." "It is the burden of leadership," Damien said. "One I have carried since I was quite young." "How young?" "I became alpha at 19, Damien said. "My father was killed in a border skirmish, much like the one currently threatening us, and the pack needed a leader immediately. I did not have the luxury of preparation." Elena's expression softened further, something like understanding passing between them. "That explains a great deal about you," she said. "The way you carry yourself, so careful and controlled. I imagine there was very little room for anything else once that responsibility fell on you." "There was not," Damien agreed, somewhat surprised by how easily she had seen through to a truth he rarely discussed with anyone, even those closest to him. "Though I find myself less inclined toward careful control since meeting you." Elena glanced at him sharply, clearly caught off guard by the admission, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, the silence between them charged with something neither was quite ready to acknowledge fully. "I should not have said that," Damien said finally, looking away. "Why not?" Elena asked, her voice quieter now, less guarded than Damien had heard it before. "Is it not true?" "It is true," Damien admitted. "But it complicates matters I am not certain you would welcome the complication of." Elena studied him for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression, before she finally spoke again. "You have been strange since the day I stormed into your hall," she said. "Strange in ways I cannot quite explain. You watch me like you are trying to solve some puzzle, And you remember things I mention only in passing. And you look at me sometimes like—" She trailed off, shaking her head slightly. "I do not know how to describe it." Damien's chest tightened at her words, aware that the moment for honesty was approaching, whether he felt fully prepared for it or not. He had promised himself he would tell her eventually, and perhaps now, in this quiet moment away from the pressures of the council and the looming threat of the Draven pack, was as good a time as any. "There is something I have not yet explained to you," he said carefully. "Something that happened the day you first came to my hall." Elena turned to face him fully, her expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "What is it?" Before Damien could answer, a shout rang out from the direction of the village, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching through the fields. Both of them turned to see a young village boy running toward them, breathless and clearly alarmed. "Miss Elena," the boy gasped, stumbling to a stop before them. "Your mother needs you right away. Something has happened at the cottage." Elena was on her feet instantly, all traces of their previous conversation forgotten in the face of sudden concern. "What happened?" "Is she hurt?" "I do not know," the boy said. "She just told me to find you as quickly as possible." Elena turned to Damien, torn between the urgency of the moment and the conversation left unfinished between them. But the decision was not difficult. "I have to go," she said. "Go," Damien said immediately, rising as well. "I will come with you, in case there is anything I can do to help." They hurried together, back toward the village, Elena's earlier composure replaced by visible anxiety, as they approached her family's cottage. Inside, they found Elena's mother, a weathered woman with kind eyes, now creased with worry, kneeling beside Elena's younger brother, who lay on a small cot, pale and clearly in pain, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "He fell from the loft," Elena's mother explained quickly, relief evident in her voice at her daughter's arrival. "I think his leg may be broken." Elena moved immediately to her brother's side, her earlier composure replaced entirely by focused urgency as she began assessing the injury with careful, practiced hands. "It is broken," she confirmed after a moment. "We need to set it properly before the swelling worsens." "I can help," Damien said, stepping forward. "I have some experience with injuries of this kind, from years of training accidents among my own pack." Elena looked up at him, gratitude evident despite the tension in her expression. "Please," she said simply. Together, they worked to stabilize the boy's leg, Damien's steady hands and calm instructions, helping guide Elena's mother through the process of splinting the fracture properly, while Elena comforted her brother, speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones, despite the visible fear in her own eyes. By the time the leg was properly secured, the boy's breathing had steadied somewhat, though his face remained pale with lingering pain. "He will need rest, and the leg should be checked again in a few days to ensure it is healing properly," Damien said once the immediate crisis had passed. "But he should recover fully in time." Elena's mother thanked him profusely, her earlier wariness toward the Alpha King entirely replaced by genuine gratitude, but Elena herself remained quiet, watching Damien with an expression that had shifted noticeably since their conversation in the fields had been interrupted. Later, once her brother had been settled comfortably, and her mother had stepped outside to fetch water, Elena finally approached Damien again, her earlier guardedness softened by everything that had just occurred. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying, and for helping. You did not have to do either." "I wanted to," Damien said simply. Elena studied him for a long moment, something warm and uncertain passing across her features. "You were about to tell me something earlier," she said, "before we were interrupted." Damien hesitated, aware that the moment had arrived again, though he found himself suddenly uncertain about how to proceed given everything that had just happened, the exhaustion evident on Elena's face, the lingering worry for her brother still fresh in her expression. "It can wait," he said finally, gently. "You have had enough to manage today. I will tell you when the time is right." Elena nodded slowly, though curiosity remained evident in her eyes. "You will tell me eventually?" "I promise," Damien said, and this time, the promise felt different than the ones he had made about compensation and rebuilding fences, heavier somehow, carrying the weight of everything still unspoken between them. He left shortly after, riding back toward the estate as the sun began to set, his wolf simultaneously satisfied by the closeness they had shared, and restless with the truth still left unspoken. He knew he could not delay much longer. The bond between them was growing too significant to remain hidden, and Elena deserved to understand exactly what had happened the day she had walked into his hall and unknowingly changed the course of both their lives. As he rode through the darkening forest, his mind turned once more toward the looming threat of the Draven pack, aware that whatever peace he had found in the fields with Elena would need to be balanced carefully against the responsibilities still waiting for him at the estate. He did not yet know how these two forces, the pull of the imprint and the demands of leadership, would ultimately resolve themselves, but he sensed, with the same instinctive certainty that had guided him since the moment he first saw her, that the answer would arrive soon, whether he felt ready for it or not. The council chamber felt colder than usual the following morning, though Damien suspected the chill had less to do with the weather and more to do with the tension gathered among the advisors seated around the long table. Word of the imprint had spread through the pack in the days since the meeting where he had first confirmed it, and the reactions among his people had proven far more varied than he expected. Some among the pack, particularly the older wolves who remembered stories of imprints from generations past, viewed the bond with a kind of reverence, understanding it as a rare and sacred occurrence beyond anyone's control. Others, especially those most concerned with the political implications of an alpha king bonded to a human, viewed the situation with open skepticism and concern. "The Draven pack has already heard rumors," Edric said grimly, opening the morning's meeting without preamble. "Word travels quickly between territories, and an imprint of this nature, particularly one involving a human, is the kind of news that spreads fastest of all." "What are they saying?" Damien asked, keeping his expression carefully neutral despite the unease settling in his chest. "That the Alpha King has been weakened by an unwanted bond," Edric continued. "That his attention is divided, his judgment compromised. Corwin Draven has apparently begun using this rumor to bolster his own pack's confidence, suggesting our territory is vulnerable to further incursion." Damien's jaw tightened at the news, understanding immediately the danger such rumors posed, not simply to his personal reputation, but to the safety of everyone under his protection. "The imprint does not weaken me," he said firmly. "If anything, it has sharpened my resolve." "With respect, my lord," Edric said carefully. "Perception matters as much as reality in matters of territorial politics. If the Draven pack believes you distracted, they will act on that belief regardless of whether it holds any truth." "Then we must demonstrate otherwise," Damien said. "I want increased patrols along the western border, and I want our defenses reinforced at every vulnerable point. Corwin Draven will find no weakness to exploit." The council spent the remainder of the meeting discussing specific strategies for reinforcing the border, but the underlying tension surrounding the imprint remained present throughout the discussion, an unspoken concern that colored every decision made. Damien left the meeting with a heavier heart than he had entered it, aware that the bond he had not chosen was now beginning to threaten the very territory he had sworn to protect. He found himself, in the days that followed, torn between two competing instincts: the pull toward Elena that grew no weaker despite the political complications it created, and the responsibility he felt toward his pack, a responsibility that demanded he project strength and focus at exactly the moment his personal life had become most complicated. He did not visit the village for nearly a week, forcing himself to remain focused entirely on border defenses and diplomatic efforts aimed at reducing tension with the Draven pack. The absence weighed on him more heavily than he expected, his wolf pacing restlessly beneath the surface of his calm exterior, aware of the distance and increasingly unwilling to accept it without complaint. It was Elena, in the end, who broke the standoff, arriving unannounced at the estate gates on a cool morning, nearly a week after their last meeting, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration that Damien recognized immediately, even from a distance. "You disappeared again," she said without preamble, as he met her in the entrance hall, guards watching curiously from a respectful distance. "No visits, no messages, nothing. I began to wonder if something had happened to you." "I apologize," Damien said. "The situation along the border has required my full attention." Elena studied him carefully, something shrewd in her expression. "That is not the entire reason, is it?" Damien hesitated, aware that further evasion would serve neither of them well. "There are rumors circulating," he admitted finally. "Rumors that our connection has weakened my leadership in the eyes of the Draven pack. I have been trying to counter those rumors by focusing entirely on matters of defense. Elena's expression shifted, understanding dawning slowly, followed quickly by something like hurt. So you were avoiding me because of what others might think? It is not that simple, Damien said, though even as he spoke the words, he recognized how inadequate they sounded. It sounds exactly that simple, Elena said, crossing her arms. You told me you would explain what has been happening between us, and instead you vanish for a week because of rumors about a weakness that apparently does not even truly exist. I deserve better than that, Damien. The use of his given name, without title, struck him with unexpected force, a small intimacy that made the distance he had maintained over the past week feel suddenly foolish and unnecessary. You are right, he said. I should not have let political concerns dictate how I treated someone, this important to me. Elena's expression softened slightly at his words, though wariness remained evident in her eyes. Then explain it to me now, she said. Whatever it is you have been avoiding telling me, I am tired of half-answers and mysterious hesitation. Damien glanced around the entrance hall, aware of the guards still watching with poorly disguised curiosity, and gestured toward a quieter side chamber where they could speak privately. Elena followed, her posture tense with anticipation, and once the door closed behind them, Damien finally allowed himself to say what he had been circling around for weeks. Among wolves, there exists a rare bond called an imprint, he began carefully. It is not something that happens to every wolf, or even most wolves in a lifetime. It is an instinctive recognition, deeper than attraction, deeper than choice, of someone meant to be significant beyond measure in your life. Elena listened silently, her expression carefully neutral, though Damien could see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she processed his words. The day you first came to my hall, he continued, the moment you began speaking, my wolf recognized something in you immediately. It imprinted on you, Elena, completely and instantly, in a way I have never experienced before, and did not expect to happen to me at all. Silence stretched between them for a long moment, Elena's expression unreadable as she absorbed the weight of what he had just told her. You are saying that from the very first moment, while I was screaming at you in front of your entire council, your wolf decided I was meant to be your mate? Essentially, yes, Damien admitted. Elena let out a short, disbelieving laugh, though there was no humor in it. That is either the strangest thing I have ever heard, or the most absurd excuse for strange behavior I have ever encountered. I understand this is difficult to accept, Damien said carefully. It was difficult for me to accept as well, and I am the one whose wolf is directly affected by it. How does it work exactly? Elena asked, her tone still guarded but curious despite herself. This imprint, what does it mean, practically? Damien considered how to answer honestly, without overwhelming her further. It means my wolf is drawn to you in ways beyond my control, he said. It means I feel your presence more acutely than I feel almost anything else, and your absence creates a restlessness that is difficult to ignore. It does not mean you are obligated to feel the same way, or that the bond forces anything upon you. It simply exists, whether either of us wanted it or not. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had shared, before something occurred to her that made her expression shift into something closer to disbelief. Wait, she said slowly. You said this happened while I was yelling at you. Does that mean your wolf interpreted my anger as something else? Damien felt heat rise to his face, an unfamiliar sensation for a man usually so composed. It seems my wolf has interpreted your anger, at least initially, as a form of passionate connection, he admitted. It did not distinguish between fury directed at me and genuine affection. To my wolf, the intensity of your feelings mattered more than their specific nature. Elena stared at him for a long moment before a laugh escaped her, unexpected and genuine, breaking through the tension that had built between them. So your wolf thought I was flirting with you by threatening to bring an entire village to your doorstep. Something along those lines, Damien admitted, a small smile tugging at his own mouth despite the seriousness of the conversation. That is ridiculous, Elena said, though her laughter had softened something in her expression, the earlier hurt giving way to something more curious and considering. I am aware, Damien said. Wolves are not always as sophisticated in matters of the heart as we might like to believe. Elena shook her head slowly, still processing everything he had shared, before her expression grew more serious again. even setting aside the strangeness of how it began. What does this mean for me? I am human. I have no wolf, no instinct pulling me toward you the way yours pulls you toward me. Where does that leave things between us? It leaves the choice entirely with you, Damien said carefully. The imprint affects me. It does not obligate you to feel anything you do not genuinely feel. I will not pretend the bond has not shaped how I have behaved these past weeks, but I have no wish to pressure you into something you do not want, simply because my wolf has made its own decision. Elena studied him for a long moment, something thoughtful and uncertain in her expression. I need time to think about all of this, she said finally. It is a great deal to absorb. Take whatever time you need, Damien said, though his wolf ached quietly at the thought of continued distance between them. I will not push you toward anything you are not ready for. Elena nodded slowly, moving toward the door before pausing and turning back to face him one final time. For what it is worth, she said, I do not think less of you for something you did not choose, but I need to understand my own feelings before I can decide what any of this means for me. That is fair, Damien said. More than fair. She left shortly after, and Damien remained in the quiet chamber for a long time after her departure, his wolf restless with the uncertainty of what would come next, though beneath that restlessness lingered something closer to hope, a recognition that despite the shock of the revelation, Elena had not walked away entirely. She had asked for time, not for an end to whatever had begun growing between them, and Damien found himself willing to wait, however difficult that waiting might prove to be. Outside, the sky had begun to cloud over, distant thunder rumbling faintly from the direction of the western border, a reminder that whatever personal complications occupied his thoughts, the looming threat of the Draven pack had not diminished, and would soon demand his attention once more. The storm that had threatened on the horizon during Elena's visit to the estate broke fully 2 nights later, heavy rain lashing against the windows of the great hall, as Damien reviewed reports from his border patrols by candlelight. The weather had done little to slow the Draven pack's continued provocations, and the latest report in front of him described yet another skirmish along the disputed ridge, this one more serious than the last, resulting in injuries on both sides. Callum entered quietly, his expression grim as he approached the table. Corwin Draven has requested a formal meeting, he said. He claims he wishes to discuss a resolution to the ongoing tension, though I suspect his true motive is reconnaissance, an opportunity to assess our strength firsthand. Where does he propose we meet? Damien asked. The border ridge itself, in 3 days' time, Callum said. He has requested you attend personally, with a limited escort. Damien considered the request carefully, aware of the risk inherent in meeting an increasingly aggressive rival on contested territory, but also recognizing that refusing such a meeting might be perceived as further evidence of weakness. I will attend, he said finally, but I want our strongest warriors positioned nearby, out of sight, but ready to respond, should the meeting turn hostile. Understood, Callum said, though he hesitated before turning to leave. My lord, if I may ask, has there been any resolution regarding the matter we discussed previously? The imprint? Damien's expression grew more guarded. Elena is considering what the bond means for her, he said. I have given her the space to reach her own conclusions, and if her conclusions do not align with what your wolf desires, then I will accept that outcome, Damien said, though the words felt heavier than he wanted to admit even to himself. The bond does not grant me the right to demand anything from her that she is not willing to give freely. Callum nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression despite the obvious difficulty of the situation. For what it is worth, my lord, I have observed the change in you since this bond formed. Whatever burden it carries, it seems to have brought out a version of yourself that this pack would benefit from seeing more often. Damien found himself surprised by the sentiment, though he offered his advisor a small, genuine smile in response. Thank you, Callum. That means more than you likely realize. The following days passed in careful preparation for the meeting with Corwin Draven, Damien dividing his attention between strategic planning and the persistent ache of distance from Elena, who had not reached out since their conversation in the estate's side chamber. He resisted the urge to visit the village himself, respecting the space she had requested, though his wolf grew increasingly restless with each passing day of silence. On the morning of the meeting, Damien rode toward the border ridge with a small but capable escort, the rain from days earlier having finally cleared to reveal a cold, clear sky. He found Corwin Draven already waiting at the agreed meeting point, flanked by his own escort, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp features and a calculating gaze that Damien recognized immediately as someone accustomed to assessing weakness in his opponents. "Alpha King Ashcroft," Corwin said, his tone deceptively pleasant. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I trust the journey was not too difficult, given recent distractions." The pointed reference to the rumors surrounding the imprint was not lost on Damien, but he kept his expression carefully composed. "The journey was uneventful," he said. "I am prepared to discuss a resolution to the tension along our shared border, provided you are prepared to withdraw your forces from territory that does not belong to you." Corwin's smile widened slightly, though it did not reach his eyes. Territory is a fluid concept, is it not? Boundaries shift over time, especially when the wolves meant to defend them find their attention divided by other matters. "My attention is not divided," Damien said firmly, "and any further incursion into Ashcroft territory will be met with a response you will find considerably less pleasant than this conversation." The two alphas continued their exchange for the better part of an hour, each testing the other's resolve through carefully chosen words and veiled threats. Neither willing to concede ground, yet neither quite ready to escalate the situation into open conflict. By the time the meeting concluded, no formal agreement had been reached, but Damien sensed he had at least succeeded in demonstrating that whatever personal complications occupied his life, his commitment to defending his territory remained absolute. As he rode back toward the estate afterward, however, a messenger intercepted him partway through the forest, breathless and clearly alarmed. "My lord," the messenger gasped, "there has been an incident at the Whitfield village. A group of Draven scouts were spotted near the outskirts, and there are reports of a confrontation." Damien's blood ran cold, his wolf surging forward with sudden, sharp urgency. "Is anyone injured?" "I do not know the full details," the messenger admitted. "The report only just reached us." Without hesitation, Damien turned his horse toward the village, riding hard through the forest with his escort struggling to keep pace, his heart pounding with a fear he had not experienced in years, not since the early days of his leadership, when every threat had felt personal and immediate. The thought of Elena in danger, of the Draven pack targeting her village as retaliation for their meeting, or worse, as a direct strike at the bond that had become common knowledge across both territories, filled him with a desperate urgency he had never known before. He arrived at the village to find a tense scene. Several villagers gathered near the edge of the main road, clearly shaken, while a handful of Ashcroft guards stationed nearby stood watch with weapons drawn. Damien dismounted quickly, scanning the crowd for any sign of Elena, his wolf howling with worry beneath the surface of his composure. "Where is she?" he demanded of the nearest guard. "Elena Whitfield. Is she safe?" "She is unharmed, my lord," the guard assured him quickly. "She is at her family's cottage. The Draven scouts fled once our patrol arrived, but not before some minor damage was done to the eastern edge of the village." Relief washed through Damien so powerfully, it left him momentarily unsteady, though he quickly composed himself, moving swiftly toward the Whitfield cottage. He found Elena outside, directing a small group of villagers, as they assessed damage to a nearby storage shed, her expression tense but controlled, clearly managing the aftermath of the incident with the same capable determination she brought to everything else. She looked up as he approached, and something in her expression shifted immediately at the sight of him, relief and lingering fear both evident, despite her obvious effort to remain composed for the sake of those around her. "You heard," she said simply. "I came as soon as I received word," Damien said. "Are you truly unharmed?" "I am fine," Elena said, though her voice trembled slightly, betraying the fear she had clearly been suppressing. "They did not get far into the village before your patrol arrived. A few scouts, likely testing our defenses, or perhaps sending a message." "A message aimed at me," Damien said grimly, understanding immediately the implication behind the timing of the attack, coming so soon after his meeting with Corwin Draven. This was retaliation, or perhaps a warning, meant to demonstrate that they know exactly where my attention is divided. Elena's expression hardened at the realization. "They targeted my village because of the bond between us?" "It appears that way," Damien admitted, guilt settling heavily in his chest. "I am sorry, Elena. This danger exists because of something you never asked for, a bond you did not choose." Elena studied him for a long moment, something fierce and unyielding, replacing the fear in her expression. "Do not apologize for something outside your control," she said firmly. "If the Draven Pack believes targeting my village will weaken you, or frighten me into abandoning whatever exists between us, they have badly misjudged who they are dealing with." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Damien felt a flicker of admiration at her resolve, his wolf practically preening at the fierce determination in her voice. "I will increase patrols around the village immediately," he said, "and I will ensure additional protection remains here, until the threat from the Draven Pack has been fully resolved." "Thank you," Elena said, though her expression remained troubled. "Damien, I have thought about everything you told me, about the imprint, about what it means. I do not have all the answers yet, but I know that seeing my village threatened because of this bond has clarified something for me." "What is that?" Damien asked, his heart beginning to pound with a different kind of urgency now. "I do not want to run from this simply because it is complicated, or dangerous, or entirely unlike anything I expected my life to become," Elena said. "I want to understand it properly, and I want to face whatever comes next, whether that includes the Draven Pack, or the strange reality of an imprint I never asked for, with clear eyes rather than fear." Damien felt something shift powerfully in his chest at her words, his wolf settling with a satisfaction deeper than anything it had experienced since the bond first formed. "I will not let anything happen to you, or to your village," he said firmly. "Whatever comes next, we will face it together." Elena held his gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, before she finally nodded, a small but genuine smile breaking through the tension of the day. "Together then," she said. Behind them, the villagers continued their work, assessing the damage, and beyond the village, the forest stretched dark and watchful toward the western border, where the threat of the Draven Pack remained ever present. But for that single moment, standing amid the aftermath of danger narrowly avoided, Damien allowed himself to feel something he had not expected to feel, so soon after the chaos of the day. A quiet, steady hope that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would not face them alone. In the weeks that followed the attack on the village, a new rhythm settled between Damien and Elena, one built not on the fiery confrontation that had first brought them together, but on a steady, deliberate partnership neither had entirely anticipated. Damien increased patrols around the village as promised, and Elena, rather than retreating into caution, found herself increasingly involved in the broader concerns of the territory. Attending strategy discussions when Damien invited her, offering insight into the human communities scattered throughout Ashcroft lands that even his most experienced advisors sometimes overlooked. "You understand people in ways my council often misses," Damien told her one evening, as they reviewed a map spread across a table in his study, tracing the boundaries of villages most vulnerable to further Draven aggression. "Your perspective has proven valuable more than once these past weeks." "I simply notice things that matter to ordinary people," Elena said, though a small smile suggested she appreciated the compliment more than she wanted to admit. "Your council tends to think in terms of strategy and territory. I think in terms of who will go hungry, or who will lose their home, if a decision goes wrong." "Those considerations are not so different from strategy," Damien said. "A leader who forgets the people beneath the territory he defends is not truly leading at all." Elena glanced up at him, something warm flickering in her expression. "You have changed, you know, since that first day I stormed into your hall." "Have I?" Damien asked, genuinely curious. "You listen more," Elena said. "You used to carry yourself like every decision was already made, before anyone else spoke. Now you actually consider what people say, even when it challenges you." Damien considered her words carefully, recognizing the truth in them even as he tried to understand exactly when the shift had occurred. "Perhaps I have simply had reason to reconsider what leadership truly requires," he said. "You have shown me that strength is not always about certainty. Sometimes it is about being willing to be questioned, and to change course when the questioning proves justified." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, Callum entering with a folded report in hand, his expression carrying the particular weight that had become familiar whenever news arrived from the western border. "My lord," Callum said, glancing briefly at Elena before continuing. "We have received word that Corwin Draven is mobilizing a larger force along the ridge. Our scouts estimate at least 3 times the number of warriors previously stationed there." Damien's expression hardened immediately. the ease of the previous conversation giving way to the familiar weight of his responsibilities. "This is no longer a matter of testing boundaries," he said. "This is preparation for a full assault." "That is our assessment as well," Callum confirmed. "The council believes we have perhaps a week, possibly less, before Corwin makes his move." Elena's expression grew tense at the news, understanding immediately the gravity of the situation. "What will you do?" "We must prepare our own defenses accordingly," Damien said, already moving toward the map spread across the table, his mind shifting rapidly into the strategic focus that leadership demanded. "Callum, I want every available warrior mobilized along the western border by tomorrow evening. We cannot afford to be caught unprepared." "Understood," Callum said, though he hesitated before leaving, glancing once more toward Elena with an expression that suggested unspoken concern. "My lord, given the scale of this threat, perhaps it would be wise to consider evacuating the most vulnerable villages, including the Whitfield settlement, further from the border until the situation is resolved." "No," Elena said immediately, before Damien could respond. "My family and my neighbors have already rebuilt once, because of conflict connected to this territory. I will not abandon our home again without a fight." "Elena," Damien said gently, though his wolf understood and respected her resolve, even as concern for her safety pulled at him powerfully. "If the Draven pack moves against the border in force, your village lies close enough to the potential conflict that the danger could become severe." "Then let me help," Elena said firmly. "I am not asking to be protected from a distance, while everything I care about hangs in the balance. Give me a role in preparing our defenses, some way to contribute, rather than simply waiting to be told whether my home has survived." Damien studied her for a long moment, recognizing the same fierce determination that had first drawn his wolf's attention weeks earlier, and found himself unable to argue against it, even as worry for her safety weighed heavily on his mind. "There is a role you could fill," he said finally. "The villages along the border will need coordination, someone to help organize evacuation routes for the most vulnerable residents, children, the elderly, those unable to defend themselves should the situation become dangerous enough to require it. You know these communities better than any of my advisors." Elena nodded firmly, relief evident in her expression at being given something concrete to contribute, rather than simply waiting helplessly for news. "I can do that," she said. "I will need access to maps of the surrounding villages, and permission to coordinate directly with the leaders of each community." "You will have both," Damien said. "Callum, please ensure Elena receives full cooperation from our administrative staff in organizing this effort." "Of course, my lord," Callum said, though the concern in his expression had not fully faded. A wariness that Damien understood came not from doubt in Elena's capability, but from the danger inherent in placing her so close to the coming conflict. Over the following days, Elena threw herself into the preparations with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything she cared about, traveling between villages to coordinate evacuation plans, working alongside Damien's advisors, despite initial skepticism from some who still harbored doubts about a human woman's place in matters of territorial defense. Gradually, however, her competence and clear dedication won over even the most reluctant among the council, and by the time the week drew to a close, the preparations for the coming conflict had taken shape more thoroughly than Damien had initially dared hope. Late one evening, as the final details of the evacuation plans were being reviewed, Damien found Elena alone, in a small chamber adjacent to the council room, poring over a map by candlelight, her expression tired but focused. He entered quietly, watching her for a moment, before she noticed his presence. "You should rest," he said gently. "You have been working without pause for days." "There is too much left to finish," Elena said, though exhaustion was evident in her voice. "If Corwin Draven attacks before everything is properly coordinated, people could die because of gaps in the plan." Damien moved closer, gently taking the map from her hands and setting it aside. "The plan is as thorough as it can reasonably be," he said. "You have done remarkable work, Elena, but even the strongest warrior cannot fight effectively without rest, and the same is true of the mind." Elena looked up at him, something vulnerable flickering beneath the exhaustion in her expression. "I am frightened, Damien," she admitted quietly, the admission clearly costing her something, given how rarely she allowed herself such openness. "Not simply for myself, but for everyone in these villages, who trusts that the preparations we have made will be enough." Damien reached out, gently taking her hand in his, a small gesture that nonetheless carried significant weight given the careful distance they had maintained, even as their bond had deepened over the preceding weeks. "Fear is not weakness," he said softly. "It simply means you understand what is at stake. I am frightened as well, more than I have been in a very long time." "You do not seem frightened," Elena said, though she did not pull her hand away. "I have spent years learning to project calm, regardless of what I feel underneath," Damien admitted. "But since the moment my wolf recognized you, I have felt more vulnerable than I have allowed myself to feel since I was very young. The thought of losing you, or losing the people you have come to care for so deeply, frightens me more than any threat Corwin Draven could pose to my own life." Elena studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, softening the guarded distance she had maintained even as their partnership had deepened. "I have been thinking about what you told me," she said quietly, "about the imprint, and what it means. I have spent weeks trying to understand my own feelings, separate from whatever pull exists on your side of this bond." "And what have you concluded?" Damien asked carefully. "That it does not matter anymore whether my feelings began independently of your wolf's recognition, or whether they have grown alongside it," Elena said. "What matters is that they are real now, entirely my own, chosen freely, rather than compelled by anything beyond my control." Damien's breath caught at her words, hope rising powerfully in his chest, despite the looming danger that awaited them both in the days ahead. "Elena," he said softly. "I care for you," Elena said simply, the words carrying the weight of careful consideration rather than impulsive declaration. "Not because your wolf decided I was meant for you, but because of who you have shown yourself to be these past weeks, patient and thoughtful, willing to listen and to change, fierce in your protection of those you care for. Whatever the imprint started, what I feel now is entirely my own choice." Damien reached up, gently cupping her face in his hand, his wolf finally, fully at peace for the first time since the bond had formed. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for choosing this, despite everything uncertain and dangerous that surrounds us." "We still have a war to prepare for," Elena said, though a small smile had finally broken through her exhaustion. "We do," Damien agreed, "but we will face it together, exactly as we promised." Outside, the night stretched dark and quiet over the estate. The calm before a storm that both of them understood was rapidly approaching. But within that small chamber, for just a moment longer, they allowed themselves to simply exist together, two people who had found something unexpected and real amid circumstances neither had chosen, bound now not by instinct alone, but by a choice made freely, despite every danger that lay ahead. The attack came sooner than anyone anticipated, arriving not at the western ridge where Damien's forces had concentrated their defenses, but in a swift, coordinated strike against 3 border villages simultaneously, a tactic clearly designed to divide Ashcroft attention and overwhelm scattered defenses rather than face the strength gathered at the primary point of conflict. Word reached the estate just after midnight, a breathless scout arriving with news that sent the entire household into immediate motion. Damien was awake and dressed within minutes, his wolf surging with fierce, protective urgency as reports continued arriving, each more alarming than the last. "Corwin Draven has split his forces," Callum reported, meeting Damien in the entrance hall as warriors began assembling in the courtyard beyond. "Smaller units have struck at 3 villages along the southern edge of the border, including the Whitfield settlement." Damien's blood ran cold at the mention of Elena's village, his wolf howling with desperate urgency beneath the surface of his forced composure. "Casualties?" he demanded. "Unclear at this time," Callum admitted. "Our nearest patrol is already moving to respond, but the distance means they will not arrive for some time yet." "I am going myself," Damien said, already moving toward the courtyard where his horse waited among the gathering warriors. "My lord, the western ridge remains the primary concern," Edric argued, hurrying to keep pace. "If this is a diversion designed to draw our main forces away from the true point of attack, then we will address that possibility once I know Elena and her family are safe," Damien said firmly, mounting his horse without further discussion. "Callum, take command of the forces at the ridge. Do not let Corwin's main strength through our defenses, regardless of what happens elsewhere." "Understood," Callum said, though worry remained evident in his expression, as Damien wheeled his horse toward the southern villages, a contingent of his fastest warriors falling into formation behind him. The ride felt endless, every minute stretching with unbearable tension, as Damien pushed his horse harder than he had in years, his wolf clawing at the edges of his control, desperate to reach Elena before harm could befall her. The forest blurred past in the darkness, and by the time the first signs of the village came into view, smoke already rising against the pale early morning sky, Damien's fear had transformed into something colder and more focused, a fierce determination that pushed exhaustion and doubt entirely from his mind. He arrived to find chaos, several buildings near the village edge engulfed in flames, villagers scrambling to gather what belongings they could while defending themselves against a group of Draven warriors who had clearly expected to encounter no meaningful resistance. Damien's presence, along with his warriors, shifted the balance of the confrontation almost immediately, the Draven scouts realizing quickly that they had underestimated the speed of the Ashcroft response. "Where is Elena?" Damien demanded of the first villager he encountered, even as he moved to engage a Draven warrior who had turned to face him. "The Whitfield cottage," the villager gasped, pointing toward the far edge of the settlement. She was helping coordinate the evacuation when the attack began. Damien fought his way through the chaos with single-minded purpose, his wolf lending strength and speed to every movement as he cleared a path toward the cottage. The scene that greeted him upon arrival stopped his heart entirely for one terrible moment. Several Draven warriors surrounding the cottage, while Elena stood before it, positioned protectively between the attackers and a group of frightened children she had clearly been trying to shepherd to safety. She was not helpless, however, wielding a heavy wooden staff with surprising skill, having already managed to fend off one attacker, who now lay groaning on the ground nearby. But she was badly outnumbered, and Damien's wolf surged forward with a desperate protective fury, unlike anything he had experienced before. "Elena!" he shouted, already moving to intercept the nearest threat. She glanced up at the sound of his voice, relief flashing across her face even as she remained focused on the immediate danger before her. "Behind you!" she called out in warning, and Damien turned just in time to deflect an attack from a Draven warrior, who had circled around to flank him. The fight that followed was brutal and fast, Damien's warriors arriving moments later to reinforce his position, and within minutes the remaining Draven scouts, realizing they had lost their advantage entirely, began retreating back toward the forest edge rather than face continued resistance. Damien allowed a small contingent to pursue them briefly before calling his warriors back, more concerned with securing the village and tending to the wounded than with punishing scouts who had already been driven off. Once the immediate threat had passed, Damien turned back to find Elena kneeling beside one of the children she had been protecting, a young girl no older than 6 who had suffered a minor cut to her arm during the chaos. Elena's hands were steady as she wrapped the wound with a strip of cloth torn from her own sleeve, though Damien could see the tremor beneath her composed exterior, the aftermath of adrenaline and fear finally beginning to catch up with her. "You are unharmed?" Damien asked, kneeling beside her, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury despite her apparent composure. "I am fine," Elena said, though her voice shook slightly. "A few bruises, nothing serious. The children were my priority." "You put yourself between them and armed attackers," Damien said, a mixture of admiration and lingering fear evident in his voice. "You could have been killed." "I could not simply stand aside and let them be harmed," Elena said simply, finishing the bandage on the young girl's arm before finally allowing herself to meet Damien's gaze fully. "I told you I would not run from danger, Damien. That has not changed simply because the danger became real." Damien reached out, gently pulling her into an embrace, despite the chaos still evident around them. Villagers working to extinguish the last of the flames and tend to other injuries scattered throughout the settlement. Elena leaned into him for a moment, her composed exterior finally cracking slightly as the full weight of what had just occurred settled over her. "I was terrified," she admitted quietly, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Not for myself, but for the children, for my family, for everyone who trusted the preparations we made would be enough." "You saved lives today," Damien said softly, holding her steady as the tremors of delayed shock ran through her. "Your courage protected these children when they needed protection most." Elena pulled back slightly, meeting his gaze with an expression that carried both exhaustion and fierce determination. "This is not over, is it?" she asked. "This was only one part of a larger attack." "It was," Damien confirmed grimly, his thoughts already turning back toward the western ridge, and the larger force Corwin Draven had gathered there, wondering whether Callum's defenses had held against whatever assault had been launched in coordination with this diversionary strike on the southern villages. I need to return to the border. Callum is holding the primary defense, but I do not know how the confrontation there has unfolded. Then go, Elena said firmly, straightening despite her obvious exhaustion. I will remain here to help the village recover and ensure the wounded receive proper care. You are needed elsewhere. Damien hesitated, torn between the urgent need to return to the border and reluctance to leave Elena so soon after the danger she had just faced. But he recognized the same fierce capability in her that had first drawn his wolf's attention weeks earlier, and he trusted, however difficult it proved, that she was more than capable of managing what remained here, while he addressed the larger threat still unfolding. I will return as soon as I can, he said, pressing a brief kiss to her forehead, before rising to gather his remaining warriors. Stay safe, Elena, please. You as well, Elena said, though her expression carried a fierce determination that suggested she trusted him to survive whatever awaited at the ridge, as thoroughly as he trusted her to manage the aftermath here. Damien rode hard toward the western border, his mind consumed with worry for Callum and the warriors he had left to defend the primary point of conflict, his wolf still buzzing with the adrenaline of the recent confrontation, even as new anxiety built with every mile that brought him closer to the ridge. The sun had fully risen by the time he arrived, and the scene that greeted him told a story of fierce, sustained conflict. The ground churned and scarred from battle, warriors on both sides bearing visible wounds from a confrontation that had clearly tested every ounce of strength and strategy the Ashcroft forces possessed. Callum met him near the front lines, exhaustion evident in every line of his weathered face, though relief flickered briefly at the sight of Damien's arrival. The main assault has been repelled, Callum reported. Corwin overextended his forces, expecting our attention divided too thoroughly to mount an effective defense here. He miscalculated. Casualties? Damien asked, scanning the aftermath of the battle with careful assessment. Fewer than we feared, though not none, Callum said grimly. We held the ridge, my lord. Corwin's forces have retreated, though I do not believe this conflict has fully concluded. Damien nodded slowly, understanding the truth in his advisor's assessment, even as relief washed through him at the news that the primary defense had held. We will need to reassess our position carefully, he said. Corwin has shown he is willing to employ diversionary tactics rather than face us directly. We cannot assume this retreat signals the end of hostilities. As the day wore on and reports continued arriving from across the territory, a clearer picture began to emerge of the full scope of the attack, the coordinated strikes against southern villages having ultimately failed to achieve their goal of dividing Ashcroft forces effectively enough to break through at the ridge. Damien's decision to personally respond to the threat against Elena's village, rather than remaining solely focused on the primary confrontation, had proven, in the end, not to be the strategic vulnerability some among his council had feared, but rather a demonstration of exactly the kind of leadership that inspired loyalty among both his warriors and the human communities he protected. That evening, as Damien finally allowed himself a moment of rest amid the ongoing efforts to secure the border and tend to the wounded, his thoughts turned once more toward Elena, toward the fierce courage she had shown in defending the children of her village, toward the choice she had made to stand beside him, despite every danger their bond had brought into her life. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever further conflict Corwin Draven might attempt to provoke, Damien found himself steadied by a certainty that had grown stronger with every trial they had faced together. Elena Whitfield was not simply the woman his wolf had recognized in a moment of instinctive certainty weeks earlier. She had become, through her own choices and her own fierce dedication to those she loved, someone Damien could not imagine facing the future without. Imprint or no imprint, danger or no danger, whatever came next. In the days following the failed assault, an uneasy quiet settled over the Ashcroft territory, the kind of stillness that comes not from true peace, but from both sides catching their breath before whatever comes next. Damien split his time between overseeing repairs to the damaged border defenses and traveling regularly to the southern villages, where recovery efforts continued steadily under the combined coordination of his own advisors and Elena, whose role in the territory's affairs had shifted noticeably since the attack. No longer was she simply a village woman with occasional involvement in matters of leadership. She had become, in the eyes of both the pack and the human communities scattered throughout Ashcroft lands, someone whose judgment and courage commanded genuine respect. A bridge between two worlds that had rarely found reason to trust one another so completely before. "The council has requested you attend the next strategy meeting formally," Damien told her one afternoon, as they walked together along the edge of the rebuilt fence line at her family's cottage, the fields around them showing steady signs of recovery, despite everything that had befallen them in recent weeks. Not simply as a guest, but as a recognized advisor on matters concerning the human villages within our territory. Elena's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Your council wants a human woman as a formal advisor?" "Several members initially resisted the idea," Damien admitted. "But your contributions during the crisis proved impossible to dismiss. Even Edric, who was among the most skeptical when this bond first became known, has acknowledged your value to our defense strategy." "That is quite a shift," Elena said, though a small, proud smile suggested she was pleased despite her surprise. "I accept, of course, though I imagine there will still be those who resent my presence in such discussions." "There likely will be," Damien said honestly. "Change of this magnitude rarely comes without resistance, but you have already proven yourself capable of handling far greater challenges than a few skeptical advisors." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young messenger, breathless from running, clutching a sealed letter that he handed to Damien with obvious urgency. Damien broke the seal quickly, his expression darkening as he read the contents. "What is it?" Elena asked, concern evident in her voice. "A message from Corwin Draven," Damien said grimly. "He claims to seek a formal peace negotiation, proposing a meeting at neutral ground along the border in 3 days' time." Elena studied his expression carefully. "You do not trust this offer?" "I do not," Damien confirmed. "Corwin has shown himself willing to employ deception and diversion in pursuit of his goals. A sudden request for peace, so soon after a failed assault, seems designed more to buy time to regroup his forces than to genuinely resolve our conflict." "Then what will you do?" Damien considered the question carefully, weighing the risks of refusing outright against the potential benefits of appearing to engage in good faith diplomacy, while remaining vigilant for any sign of further treachery. "I will attend the meeting," he said finally, "but I will not go unprepared, and I will not go alone. If Corwin intends further deception, I intend to be ready for it." Elena's expression grew tense with concern. "This could be a trap, Damien. A way to lure you away from your defenses, or worse, an opportunity to eliminate you directly and throw the entire territory into chaos." "I am aware of the risk," Damien said, "but refusing the meeting entirely would only confirm the narrative Corwin has already begun spreading, that our territory is too fractured and distracted to engage in proper diplomacy. I must attend, if only to demonstrate that we remain strong and unified despite everything that has occurred." "Then I am coming with you," Elena said firmly, leaving no room for argument in her tone. "Elena, this is far too dangerous," Damien said immediately. "If Corwin intends treachery, your presence would only provide him with additional leverage against me. Or my presence demonstrates exactly the unity and strength you wish to project," Elena countered. "You said yourself that our bond has become common knowledge across both territories. If I remain hidden away during this negotiation, it suggests weakness, fear, exactly the perception you are trying to counter." Damien studied her for a long moment, recognizing the truth in her argument, even as every protective instinct within him rebelled against the idea of placing her in potential danger. "If you accompany me," he said slowly, "you will remain surrounded by warriors at all times, and you will follow every instruction given for your safety, without hesitation, regardless of how the negotiation unfolds." "Agreed," Elena said, relief evident in her expression at his acceptance of her involvement. Over the following days, preparations for the meeting proceeded carefully, Damien ensuring that additional warriors would be positioned strategically near the negotiation site, hidden but ready to respond, should Corwin attempt any form of betrayal. Callum expressed continued reservations about the wisdom of the meeting entirely, but ultimately deferred to Damien's judgment, understanding the delicate balance required between projecting strength and avoiding unnecessary escalation. On the morning of the meeting, Damien and Elena rode together toward the designated neutral ground, a clearing along the border marked by an ancient standing stone that had served as a meeting point for generations of territorial disputes. Corwin Draven was already waiting when they arrived, flanked by a modest escort that nonetheless carried an air of coiled tension beneath its outward calm. "Alpha King Ashcroft," Corwin said, his tone carrying the same false pleasantness Damien remembered from their previous encounter. His gaze shifted toward Elena, something calculating flickering behind his eyes. "And this must be the woman responsible for so much recent excitement. I confess, I did not expect you to bring her along." "Elena serves as an advisor to my council on matters concerning the human communities within our territory," Damien said evenly. "Her presence here reflects the unity of our leadership, not weakness." "Unity," Corwin repeated, something skeptical in his tone. "An interesting choice of word, given how thoroughly your attention has apparently been divided in recent weeks." "My attention has never wavered from the defense of my territory," Damien said firmly, "as your recent failed assault demonstrated quite clearly." Corwin's expression tightened slightly at the reminder of his defeat, though he recovered his composure quickly. "A minor setback," he said dismissively. "One that need not prevent us from discussing a more permanent resolution to our conflict, provided you are willing to consider reasonable terms." The negotiation that followed proved tense and drawn out, Corwin proposing terms that would have granted his pack access to significant portions of contested land. Terms Damien recognized immediately as far too generous to represent a genuine desire for peace. Elena, watching the exchange carefully, occasionally offered quiet observations that helped Damien navigate the more subtle implications of Corwin's proposals, her outside perspective proving valuable in identifying potential deceptions embedded within seemingly reasonable language. As the meeting stretched into its second hour without meaningful progress, Damien began to sense something shifting in the atmosphere, a subtle tension among Corwin's escort that suggested growing impatience, or perhaps anticipation of something Damien had not yet perceived. "I believe we have reached the limits of productive discussion for today," Damien said finally, deciding to conclude the meeting before whatever Corwin might be planning could fully materialize. "I will consider your proposals, though I suspect neither of us expects genuine agreement to emerge from such generous terms offered so soon after open conflict." Corwin's expression flickered with something dangerous before smoothing back into careful neutrality. "Of course," he said. "I look forward to your formal response, Alpha King Ashcroft. In the meantime, perhaps your companion would care to remain a moment longer, to discuss matters of mutual interest to our respective communities." The request, delivered with deceptive casualness, sent immediate alarm through Damien's instincts, his wolf recognizing the danger embedded within the seemingly innocent invitation. "Elena remains under my protection at all times," he said firmly, positioning himself subtly between her and Corwin's escort. "Any matters concerning our territories will be discussed through proper diplomatic channels." Corwin's smile grew thin and cold. "How protective," he said. "One might almost think you feared what she could reveal, given proper opportunity." Before Damien could respond, movement erupted from the trees surrounding the clearing, additional Draven warriors emerging from concealment with weapons already drawn, the ambush Damien had feared finally revealing itself. His own hidden warriors responded immediately, emerging from their positions to counter the threat, and within moments, the negotiation clearing had transformed into a scene of fierce, chaotic conflict. "Get Elena to safety," Damien shouted to the nearest of his warriors, even as he moved to intercept Corwin directly, understanding immediately that the false alpha's true intention had always been treachery rather than genuine peace. The warrior moved quickly to shield Elena, pulling her back from the immediate fighting, even as she struggled against the protective grip, clearly unwilling to simply flee while danger surrounded them. "Damien," she called out, fear evident in her voice, as she watched him engage Corwin directly, the two alphas circling one another with lethal intent finally unmasked. The confrontation that followed tested every ounce of skill and strength Damien possessed, Corwin proving a formidable opponent despite his deceptive tactics, the two alphas exchanging blows with a ferocity that spoke to years of carefully suppressed rivalry, finally given full expression. Around them, the broader conflict raged as well, Ashcroft and Draven warriors clashing fiercely, the outcome of the ambush hanging uncertain in the balance. Elena struggled against the warrior holding her back, her mind racing as she watched Damien locked in fierce combat with Corwin Draven. the two alphas moving with a speed and power that seemed almost impossible to follow. Around them, the clearing had become a chaotic battlefield, warriors from both territories clashing amid the trees. The peaceful negotiation site transformed entirely into a scene of violence and desperation. "We need to get you away from here," the warrior protecting her insisted, trying to pull her further back from the fighting. "I am not leaving him," Elena said firmly, twisting away enough to keep her eyes on Damien, watching as he deflected a vicious strike from Corwin, before countering with a blow of his own that staggered his opponent momentarily. The battle raged on, and Elena's fear grew with every passing moment, watching as Corwin seemed to draw on some hidden reserve of strength, his attacks growing more desperate and dangerous as the confrontation continued. Damien fought with disciplined precision, but exhaustion from days of continuous conflict along the border had clearly begun to take its toll, his movements growing marginally slower with each exchange. Then Elena noticed something the warrior beside her had missed: two additional Draven fighters circling around the edge of the clearing, clearly intending to flank Damien from behind, while his full attention remained fixed on Corwin. Without thinking through the danger to herself, Elena broke free from the warrior's grip and grabbed a fallen branch from the ground, moving with fierce determination toward the approaching threat. "Damien, behind you!" she shouted, even as she positioned herself to intercept the flanking attackers, swinging the branch with desperate strength at the nearest warrior. Her warning gave Damien the crucial moment he needed, allowing him to spin and deflect Corwin's next attack, while simultaneously becoming aware of the danger approaching from behind. He shifted his positioning rapidly, putting himself between the flanking warriors and both Elena and Corwin simultaneously, his wolf surging with protective fury at the sight of her placing herself in direct danger on his behalf. "Elena, get back," he shouted, even as he moved to intercept the flanking warriors himself, leaving Corwin momentarily unengaged. But Elena, despite the obvious danger, held her ground, wielding the branch with more skill than her limited training should have allowed, driven by pure adrenaline and fierce determination to protect the man who had come to mean everything to her. She managed to keep one of the flanking warriors at bay long enough for Damien to dispatch the other, though the effort left her breathing hard, her arms trembling from the unfamiliar exertion. Corwin, seeing his flanking maneuver failing, and sensing the tide of the broader battle beginning to turn against his warriors as well, made a desperate decision. Rather than continuing his direct confrontation with Damien, he turned his attention toward Elena instead, recognizing her as the more vulnerable target, the key to gaining leverage over his opponent, even amid clear defeat. He lunged toward her with sudden, vicious speed, and Elena, still recovering from her exertion against the flanking warrior, found herself unable to react quickly enough to avoid the attack entirely. She managed to twist aside enough to avoid the worst of it, but Corwin's strike still caught her, sending her stumbling backward with a sharp cry of pain. "Elena," Damien's voice rang out with raw, desperate fury, his wolf finally breaking free of the careful control he had maintained throughout the confrontation, a surge of protective rage propelling him forward with speed that seemed to blur the space between himself and Corwin entirely. What followed happened almost too quickly for Elena to fully process, even as she struggled to regain her footing, one hand pressed against the injury Corwin had inflicted. Damien's fury, once fully unleashed, proved more than a match for Corwin's remaining strength, the false alpha finding himself driven back repeatedly under the force of attacks, fueled by desperate love rather than simple duty or strategy. Within moments, Corwin lay defeated on the ground, his own warriors, seeing their leader fallen and understanding the battle thoroughly lost, beginning to retreat back toward the safety of the forest, rather than continue a fight they had clearly lost. Damien stood over his fallen opponent for a long moment, his chest heaving with exertion and lingering fury, before turning immediately toward Elena, all thought of Corwin forgotten entirely in his desperate need to reach her. "Elena," he said, kneeling beside her quickly, his hands gentle despite the violence he had just displayed, carefully examining the wound Corwin had inflicted. "How badly are you hurt?" "It is not serious," Elena managed, though pain was evident in her voice. "A shallow cut, nothing more. I will be fine." Despite her reassurance, Damien's expression remained tense with worry as he examined the injury more closely, relief only slowly replacing fear as he confirmed her assessment. The wound, painful, but not life-threatening. You should not have engaged those warriors directly, he said, though his tone carried more fear than reproach. You could have been killed. And you would have been struck from behind if I had not, Elena countered, wincing slightly, as Damien helped her rise carefully to her feet. We protect each other, Damien. That is what this partnership means, is it not? Damien studied her for a long moment, something fierce and tender mixing together in his expression, before he pulled her carefully into an embrace, mindful of her injury, but unable to resist the need to hold her close, after the terror of watching her fall to Corwin's attack. Yes, he said quietly, that is exactly what it means. Around them, the remnants of the battle continued to settle, Ashcroft warriors securing the surrendered Draven fighters, while others tended to the wounded on both sides. Callum arrived shortly after, having received word of the ambush, and rushed additional forces to the scene, his expression a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction at finding the confrontation already resolved in their favor. My lord, Callum said, surveying the scene with evident concern as he noticed Elena's injury. Is she? She will recover, Damien said firmly, though he did not release his protective hold on her. Ensure the wounded receive immediate care, and secure Corwin Draven properly. This treachery will not go unanswered. As warriors moved to carry out his instructions, Damien turned his full attention back to Elena, helping her toward a fallen log, where she could rest while a healer among his warriors tended properly to her wound. She winced as the healer worked, but her eyes remained fixed on Damien throughout, something steady and certain in her expression despite the pain and lingering shock of the confrontation. You fought like someone who has trained for battle her entire life, Damien said, a note of wonder mixing with lingering worry in his voice. I had no idea you possessed such skill. I have spent years defending my family and my village from whatever threats arose, long before you ever entered our lives, Elena said, a small, tired smile crossing her face despite everything. I told you once that I do not run from danger, Damien. I meant it. I know you did, Damien said softly, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, and I have never admired anyone more for it, even as it terrifies me every time you place yourself in harm's way. Elena reached up, gently covering his hand with her own. We survived this, she said. Together, exactly as we promised. Damien nodded slowly, relief and lingering adrenaline still coursing through him, as he looked around at the aftermath of the battle. The defeated Draven forces now secured, Corwin himself bound and awaiting whatever judgment would follow this final, desperate act of treachery. Whatever conflict remained ahead in negotiating a lasting peace with what remained of the Draven pack, Damien understood with absolute certainty that the greatest threat to their future had been overcome, not through his strength alone, but through the fierce, unwavering partnership he had found with the woman beside him. As the sun began to set over the clearing, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, Damien helped Elena rise carefully to her feet, preparing for the journey back toward the estate, where proper rest and recovery awaited them both. Behind them, the standing stone that had witnessed this final confrontation stood silent and ancient, a testament to conflicts resolved and alliances forged throughout generations, now bearing witness to a new chapter in the long history of the territory it had watched over for so long. 3 weeks passed before the full consequences of Corwin Draven's defeat became clear, negotiations with the remaining Draven leadership proving far smoother than anyone had anticipated, once word spread of their former alpha's treachery and subsequent downfall. A new leader emerged among the Draven pack, a cautious but reasonable woman named Marissa, who had opposed Corwin's aggressive tactics from the beginning, and within weeks, a genuine, lasting peace had been established between the two territories, one built on fair terms, rather than the deceptive proposals Corwin had once offered. Elena's wound healed steadily during this time, though a small scar remained as a permanent reminder of the battle that had nearly cost her everything. She wore it without complaint, a mark of the courage she had shown when it mattered most, and Damien found himself tracing it gently sometimes in quiet moments, grateful beyond words that the injury had not proven more severe. As peace settled over the territory, life gradually returned to a steadier rhythm, though nothing about it resembled the world either of them had known, before the day Elena first stormed into Damien's hall demanding answers about burned fields and broken promises. Elena's role as advisor to the council had become permanent, her insight proving invaluable not only during the crisis, but in the ongoing work of rebuilding trust between the human villages and the wolves who shared their territory. On a clear morning in early autumn, months after the conflict with the Draven pack had finally concluded, Damien called together the full council, along with representatives from every human village within Ashcroft territory, for a gathering unlike any the Great Hall had witnessed before. Elena stood beside him at the head of the room, her expression curious but not yet aware of the full significance of what Damien intended to announce. "Many of you have heard rumors these past months," Damien began, his voice carrying clearly through the assembled crowd, "regarding the bond that exists between myself and Elena Whitfield. An imprint formed the very first day she entered this hall, though neither of us understood its full significance at the time." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, though nothing approaching the shock or resistance that might once have greeted such an announcement. The past months had shown, through countless demonstrations of both courage and wisdom, exactly what Elena had come to mean, not only to her Alpha King, but to the broader well-being of the entire territory. "Tradition holds that an imprint represents a bond too significant to ignore," Damien continued, turning to face Elena directly now, something warm and vulnerable evident in his expression despite the formal setting. "But I have come to understand, through everything we have faced together these past months, that what exists between us has grown into something far greater than instinct alone ever could have created." Elena's breath caught as she watched him, sensing the significance of the moment building, even before he continued. "Elena Whitfield," Damien said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident beneath it, "you entered my life in a moment of righteous fury, demanding justice for wrongs done to those you love. In every moment since, you have shown me courage, wisdom, and a fierce dedication to protecting others that has changed not only my own understanding of leadership, but the very future of this territory. I do not ask you to accept me, because my wolf recognized something in you that first day. I ask you to accept me, because of everything we have built together since, choice by choice, trial by trial." He knelt then, before the entire assembled gathering, producing a small ring crafted from silver and set with a single stone the color of amber, matching precisely the shade of his own eyes when his wolf rose closest to the surface. "Will you accept me, Elena, not simply as your imprinted mate, but as your chosen partner, in leadership and in life, for whatever challenges and joys still await us?" Elena stared down at him, tears gathering in her eyes, despite her best efforts to maintain composure before the assembled crowd, memories flooding through her of everything they had faced together since that first furious confrontation. The fields rebuilt, the fence repaired, the danger faced side by side, the fierce partnership that had grown from such an unlikely beginning into something she could no longer imagine her life without. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion, but carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Not because fate or instinct demanded it, but because I choose you, Damien Ashcroft, completely and without reservation." The hall erupted into cheers as Damien rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before pulling her into an embrace that finally, fully sealed the promise they had made to one another weeks earlier, amid the chaos of battle. A promise to face whatever came next, together, exactly as equals. In the weeks that followed, preparations began for a celebration unlike anything the territory had witnessed in generations. Wolves and humans alike gathering to honor a union that represented far more than simply the joining of two individuals. It represented a new understanding between two communities that had once viewed each other with suspicion and distance, now bound together by the same fierce loyalty and mutual respect that had carried Damien and Elena through every trial they had faced. On the day of the ceremony itself, held in the very fields where Elena's family had once faced ruin and had since rebuilt something stronger than before, Damien stood watching as Elena approached, dressed simply but beautifully, her expression radiant with a happiness that had grown steadily since the anger of their first encounter had given way to something far deeper and more lasting. His wolf, once confused by the fury it had first sensed in her, now understood completely what it had recognized that day, not simply passion mistaken for anger, but the presence of someone whose fierce love for those she cared about burned as brightly and steadily as any flame, someone capable of matching his own dedication to protecting what mattered most. As they exchanged their final vows before the gathered crowd of wolves and villagers alike, Damien found himself reflecting on the strange, unexpected path that had led them to this moment. A path that had begun with fury and confusion, but had grown, through patience and choice and shared courage, into something neither of them could have anticipated when Elena first stormed through the doors of his hall demanding justice. "You once told me that words are easy, but actions prove what a person truly means," Damien said quietly, as they stood together, following the ceremony, watching the celebration unfold around them. Wolves and humans dancing together, beneath the autumn sky, in a scene that would have seemed impossible mere months earlier. "I hope I have proven, through everything we have faced together, that my actions have matched every word I have spoken to you since that first day." "You have," Elena said, leaning into him as they watched the celebration continue, her hand finding his easily, naturally, as though they had always belonged exactly there. "More than proven it. You have shown me that even the most unexpected beginnings can grow into something worth every difficulty along the way." Above them, the sky stretched clear and endless, the same sky that had witnessed fields burned and rebuilt, battles fought and won, a bond formed in fury that had blossomed, against every expectation, into a partnership neither wolf nor woman had ever anticipated, but both had come, in the end, to cherish beyond measure. And as the celebration continued long into the evening, marking not simply a union between two people, but the beginning of a new era of understanding between wolves and humans throughout the territory, Damien Ashcroft understood, with complete and unwavering certainty, that his wolf's instincts, however strange their origin, had led him exactly where he was always meant to be.